Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. Sorry we're a bit late. It's on the 7:30, I guess. My name is Ben Francis and we'll start today's show as usual with an update on the Ukraine war. Ukrainian troops on Wednesday announced a successful counterattack to retake the settlement of Koltiny near the city of Pokrovsk, which many Russian forces have died trying to take over the past year. The Institute for the Study of War, the ISW, said the year-long Russian effort to seize Pokrovsk has so far failed, and Russian forces appear to have abandoned the effort to take the city directly, preferring instead to conduct a wide envelopment of the city. The Kremlin may have abandoned even that for now, however, in the fact of increasing Ukrainian resistance in the area and high Russian losses. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces recaptured the settlements of Pogrebny and Orlovka, north of the town of Sutska in the Kursk Oblast, where Ukraine has held territory inside Russia since August 2024. The military added that Russian forces had struck Ukrainian units and positions near more than a dozen settlements, including several around Sutsa. Zelensky, in his nightly video address, noted it was nearly 7 months that Ukrainian forces have been holding on to the buffer zone inside the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian military said it had attacked Russia's Tupaso oil refinery on the Black Sea coast and that at least 40 explosions had been recorded at the site. Tupaso is home to one of Russia's biggest oil refineries and has been targeted by Ukrainian drones several times before throughout the war. The Ukrainian military said it had attacked 2 military airfields in Russian-controlled Crimea, but gave no further detail. Ukraine said Russian strikes on Kostiantynivka city in the east of Ukraine killed at least 5 people and wounded 8 more. Russian drones also killed 2 people near Kiev, including the Ukrainian journalist Tetiana Kulik, who worked for Ukraine Forum news agency. Any peace deal for Ukraine must include, quote, security guarantees involving the Atlantic Alliance, according to Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Italy. The Italian Prime Minister spoke as it emerged a draft deal between the United States and Ukraine did not include security guarantees, but only references Ukraine somehow obtaining them in the future. Peace in Ukraine, quote, can only be achieved if Kiev is given adequate security guarantees to make sure that what we have seen over the past 4 years, so the war, doesn't happen again, Meloni said on Tuesday. While Donald Trump said Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, would sign their, quote, very big agreement in Washington on Friday, Zelensky insisted that guarantees of peace and security remained vital as he prepared for talks with Trump. Zelensky is expected to also visit the UK this weekend for talks with Prime Minister Keir Starmer and other European leaders. The Romanian parliament has authorized its army and allies to shoot down drones which have illegally breached Romanian airspace. The EU and NATO member state have had Russian drone fragments repeatedly fall on its territory as Moscow has attacked Kiev's ports. And now moving on to our Middle East update. At least 48,365 Palestinians have been killed and 111,780 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2025, according to Gaza's health authority. Israel has released over 600 Palestinian prisoners as Hamas returns bodies of 4 hostages. The Gaza ceasefire appears to be holding after a 4-day breach, as Israel says 3 of 4 bodies identified as of this morning. The bodies of the hostages were transferred to the Red Cross in southern Gaza and driven to the border point at Karim Shalom at about midnight, when immediate identity checks were carried out using dental records. At the same time, buses carrying Palestinian prisoners arrived in the West Bank city of Ramallah, Khan Yunis in Gaza and Egypt, where 97 of the prisoners were deported. They will stay there until accepted by another country, Israeli officials said. Ambulances brought freed Palestinians to the European hospital in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, where they were set to undergo medical examination. Prisoners freed in previous exchanges have had limbs amputated while in Israeli custody, and many were extremely emancipated. The Palestinian Prisoners Information Office said this morning that 642 prisoners had been released overnight in the seventh phase of the Gaza ceasefire, of whom 46 were women or minors. If confirmed, it means Israel freed more Palestinians than scheduled after a 4-day breach in the ceasefire agreement. Also, Airbnb and Booking.com are helping Israelis make money from stolen Palestinian land, as Israel deploys tanks in the West Bank for the first time in 20 years. Two of the world's biggest travel companies are helping Israeli settlers commercialize land and properties stolen from displaced Palestinians. And moving to our first story of the night, Starmer meeting Trump. Keir Starmer's meeting with Donald Trump this week comes at a critical moment for the war in Ukraine, with discussions expected to shape NATO's future and the US-UK alliance. Starmer's visit to the White House is focused on the war in Ukraine and the future of NATO, and the US president appears increasingly focused on securing a deal with Russia. The UK Prime Minister aims to strengthen the quote-unquote special relationship between the US and UK, promoting increased defense spending, and it has trade ties to persuade Trump to support Ukraine. However, Starmer faces the challenge of balancing European security concerns with Trump's more transactional approach to global cooperation. Trump greeted Starmer amicably, and their meeting included discussions on defense, trade, AI, and investment. Starmer has committed, just prior to the meeting, to raising the UK's defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, with the ambition of reaching 3% by 2035. This pledge is seen as a key part of his strategy to gain a quote backstop security guarantee from the US for Europe, for European peacekeepers in Ukraine if a ceasefire is achieved. Starmer emphasized that such a guarantee must be sufficient to deter any future Russian aggression. During his visit, Starmer also highlighted economic opportunities between the UK and the US, particularly in technology and investment. He expressed a desire for closer cooperation, citing the importance of working together for mutual benefit. However, he also stressed he would stand firm with key issues, a sentiment echoed by his comments on the importance of reforming bureaucracy to encourage growth. Not sure that's his key issue, but Keir Starmer handed Donald Trump a letter from the King inviting him to a state visit in the UK. In the letter, the King invited the President to meet him in Scotland, either at Dumfries House of Balmoral, either at Dumfries or the House of Balmoral, which are near Trump's golf courses. Starmer's task is to convince Trump that supporting Ukraine and NATO is a win-win situation, positioning it as a strategic partnership rather than a sort of moral global obligation. Meanwhile, tensions between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are becoming more evident, particularly over a rare earth mineral deal that's currently being negotiated between Ukraine and the US. Starmer and other European leaders will continue to play a crucial role in navigating these discussions as the future of Ukraine continues to hang in the balance at the moment. Now moving on to a European story. Austrian centrist parties reached a deal to form government without the far right. Austria's three main centrist parties have reached an agreement to form a government excluding the far-right FPO after months of negotiations following the FPO's election success. 5 months after the far-right Freedom Party, FPO, emerged as the winner of parliamentary elections, Austria's three leading centrist parties have agreed to form a new government without them. The Centre-Right People's Party, OVP, the Social Democrats, SPO, and the Liberal Neos have unveiled a 200-page programme aimed at addressing Austria's struggling economy and reducing the country's budget deficit. Christian Stocker, the leader of the OVP, and the likely next chancellor, confirmed that the three parties had reached a, quote, common programme after intense negotiations. These talks, which began in September, come after an initial attempt to form a coalition in January failed. Stocker described the negotiations as some of the toughest in Austria's history and outlined the country's significant challenges, including the war in Ukraine, economic difficulties, and pressure for migration. The agreement ends months of uncertainty following the FPO's historic election performance, where it gained nearly 30% of the vote. After the initial coalition fell apart, the OVP entered talks with the FPO, but these also collapsed over disagreements on issues like EU policy and asylum procedures. The FPO's demands for control over key ministries, including Interior and Finance, was also rejected by the OVP. Austria has faced the longest period without a government in its modern history, promoting President Alexander Van der Bellen to urge party leaders to reach a deal quickly. Ministerial appointments are expected to be announced soon. The new coalition's program includes strict asylum measures such as, quote, return centers for rejected asylum seekers, a suspension of family reunification, and the possibility of a freeze on asylum applications if numbers rise. The parties have also promised to introduce a constitutional ban on headscarves while affirming their commitment to a strong European Union. While the coalition deal still requires approval from the party's leadership, political analysts predict that the new government will face significant challenges, including dwindling popularity. The FPO, which has continued to gain support since the election, is expected to emerge even stronger if a new vote is held. Now, moving on to our next story, one in America. The Trump administration ends funding for UN programs fighting HIV and AIDS. The Trump administration has ended U.S. funding for the UN program on HIV/AIDS, UN/AIDS, worsening the global fight against the disease. The decision to cut funding to the program marks the latest move by the Trump administration to scale back American involvement in global health and anti-poverty initiatives. Peter Morocco, a Trump supporter leading the effort to reduce U.S. foreign aid, announced the decision, claiming it was made, quote, for the convenience of the U.S. government and aligned with national priorities. The funding freeze has already had a significant impact on HIV treatment programs worldwide, particularly in low and middle-income countries. A new UN report highlighted the disruption caused by the cuts, which affected 55 countries. Before the freeze, the United States provided 2/3 of global funding for HIV prevention in these countries, with the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, established by George Bush in 2003, accounting for about 70% of the global HIV response. The countries most affected by the cuts include the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ivory Coast, and Haiti, where U.S. support played a crucial role in the fight against the disease. Although a waiver issued in February allows some essential services to resume, including preventing mother-to-child transmission, the suspension of aid has caused widespread suffering, with many programs remaining stalled. UNAIDS, which operates in 70 countries, has reported disruption to HIV services in 55 countries due to the freeze. Executive Director Winnie Baby warned that any reduction in support could reverse progress in the fight against AIDS, leading to more infections. In the Ivory Coast, where the US program had supported 85% of the 265,000 people living with HIV, the service have nearly collapsed since the freeze began. Despite the waiver, most US-funded HIV prevention services for those most at risk remain closed, deepening the crisis. The reduction in funding to UNAIDS is expected to worsen these challenges. And now moving on to our next story, which is quite a big story. The jailed Kurdish leader calls for the PKK to disarm. The imprisoned leader of the Kurdish militant group PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, has called for the group to disarm and dissolve. Abdullah Öcalan, has called for the group to disarm and dissolve, signaling a potential shift towards peace with Turkey after decades of conflict. Abdullah, the 75-year-old leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, has called for the disarmament of the group, which has waged a guerrilla war against Turkey for over 40 years. Abdullah, who has been imprisoned on a remote Turkish island since his capture in Kenya in 1999, issued his message through allies in Istanbul, urging the PKK to dissolve and lay down its arms. His statement is seen as a significant move that could influence Kurdish factions across the Middle East, including those in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Abdullah's call was welcomed by many Kurdish peace activists in Istanbul who viewed it as a positive development. However, the response from Turkey's nationalist government has been more cautious. Turkish officials have said they will observe the situation and assess the outcome before committing any further. Despite the cautious response, there is hope within some Kurdish political circles that this announcement could lead to a reduction in government pressure on Kurdish-affiliated politicians, especially in the southeast of Turkey, where the PKK has had significant support. The PKK has been responsible for numerous attacks in Turkey since its founding in 1978, including car bombings and shootings aimed at largely military and security targets. A ceasefire between the PKK and Turkey collapsed in 2015, leading to a renewed military action by Turkey. More than 7,000 people have been killed in the conflict, including both civilians and militants. The impact of Abdullah's call is expected to extend to Kurdish groups in Syria, such as the Democratic Forces, SDF, who have long had links with the PKK. The SDF, which has played a key role in fighting ISIS in Syria, now faces increasing pressure as Turkey continues to target Kurdish groups in the region. The PKK's future and how its various factions respond to their leader's request remains uncertain. Experts suggest that the call by the leader to for the party to put down his arms is driven by his desire to secure his legacy and the PKK's weakening position in Turkey following years of intense conflict and crackdown by the Turkish state. However, challenges remain, particularly in ensuring the political recognition of Kurdish groups and securing peace through legal and diplomatic measures. Now, moving on to our next story, a Scottish story. DFM welcomes multi-million-pound investment in Scotland's energy transition. More than £850 million have been injected into Scottish projects over the past 4 months, as investors are drawn to the country's energy transition. The total is boosted today by the Scottish National Investment Bank's SNIB's announcement of $6.4 million for subsea micropiles, which is developing a marine anchor system for large offshore construction projects. The company has also secured £2.5 million from a Japanese investor, Marubeni, and is committed to building a manufacturing facility in Scotland, supporting about 100 jobs. SNIB's investment is part of up to £500 million committed by the Scottish Government over 5 years to grow offshore wind supply industries and infrastructure. Other recent announcements have included £20 million investment by SNIB into subsea cable manufacturer XLCC's planned new facility in Hunterston, Ayrshire. £50 million investment by Force Ports in new infrastructure at the Port of Leeds to support a major offshore wind contract, as well as £800 million from Copenhagen Investment Partners for new battery storage project in South Lanarkshire and Fife. Also, £5 million from Highland and Island Enterprise to support the development of a new harbour facility for the assembly of offshore wind turbines at the Scapa Flow. Speaking ahead of a Scottish Parliament debate on increasing investment in Scotland, Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes said, quote, "The increasing pace of investment announcements will create jobs across the country and is further evidence of growing private sector investment confidence in Scotland's economic potential. Scotland has the talent, skills and resources to become a major player in the global energy transition, and the Scottish Government is determined to ensure this happens." This includes investing up to £500,000 to unlock the additional private investment we need to realise this enormous opportunity. Work is gathering pace. The backing of subsea micropile demonstrates the strategic approach the Scottish Government is taking alongside SNIB and our enterprise agencies, focusing on bringing new investment and green jobs to Scotland while supporting the delivery of our burgeoning offshore wind capacities. Moving on to our next Scottish story, Scottish Government considering reforms to the legal aid system. A discussion paper on further reforms to the legal aid system have been brought forward. The legal aid system provides publicly funded legal advice and representation in court for those who need it most in Scotland. Recent improvements in the legal aid application process to reduce the need for information during the application process include the increased use of block fees and simpler online application process. The above reforms are in addition to the announcement made by Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs on the 23rd of January 2025 that free non-means tested legal aid will be provided for bereaved families participating in death in custody fatal accident inquiries. The Scottish Government has argued that their reforms to legal aid have been set out to make the system simpler and easier for both solicitors and those who need legal assistance, along with longer-term proposals for funding and improving the delivery of services. They argue actions set out in a discussion paper will simplify the funding system and build on recent improvements to reduce the amount of information needed during the application process. However, Law Society Scotland, an organisation that represents solicitors in Scotland, has said the newly announced plans for legal aid, quote, fail to reflect their urgency and scale of the crisis in access to justice, arguing that the proposed reforms outlined are nowhere near good enough in either scale or timescale. Now, moving on to our next Scottish story. Business Minister Richard Lochhead speaks at the Made in Scotland event. Scotland's focused global trading strategy is producing tangible results, Business Minister Richard Lochhead has told an audience of Scottish exporters. The Scottish Government's sector-specific export plans target action on areas of strength such as renewable energy, technology, life sciences, and hydrogen, and the fastest-growing markets. Speaking at the Made in Scotland sold to the World Exporter Roadshow in Edinburgh, Mr. Lochhead said this approach was driving progress towards the target of growing exports to match a quarter of Scotland's gross domestic product, GDP. Examples include more than £700 million in forecast international sales for Scotland's renewable sector through the work of the Scottish Development International (SDI), $23.5 million in projected sales for Scottish brands, which took part in a showcase event in France last November. The publication of the Renewables Export Action Plan, including a new online tool to guide companies through their export journey. Mr. Lochhead said, Scotland has so much to offer with produce and brands already recognized across the world. But we can build on that while seizing the opportunity of the green energy revolution by working with companies to help them fulfill their potential through export plans in technology, life sciences, renewables, and hydrogen sectors. We have seen some impressive results. For example, of the $2.15 billion in forecast, international sales over the next 3 years, reported by our partner agency, STI, $774 million, comes from the energy transition sector. This demonstrates how our renewables export action plan, which we've published today, can help to focus efforts in the right direction. We have also seen a showcase event in Paris last in Andrews Day, which brought together Scottish and French businesses, resulting in projected sales over the next 3 years of £23.5 million for Scottish foods and luxury drinks brands, and luxury lifestyle and fashion labels. Selling Scotland to the world is an effective way of growing the Scottish economy, leading to more jobs and to improved public services, which brings prosperity across the country. And now moving on to another Scottish story, the Scottish Government consultation on cruise ship levies. Local authorities could be given the optional power to introduce a tax on cruise ships that visit their areas in the future. The Scottish Government is seeking views on the practicalities of such a levy, as well as the potential market implications and effect on local environments, economies, and communities. Analysis shows that there were around 1,000 cruise ship visits to Scottish ports in 2024, bringing around 1.2 million passengers, an increase of almost 400,000 per year compared with 2019. The Scottish Government has said it has no plans to introduce any national cruise ship levy, and instead is considering allowing councils that welcome the most cruise passengers to make that decision for themselves based on their assessment. In 2024, the Scottish Parliament passed the Visitor Levy Scotland Act, which for the first time gave local authorities the power to introduce a visitor levy on overnight accommodation in their own areas. As the act was being considered by Parliament, calls were made for a similar levy power to be given to local authorities in relation to cruise ship passengers. Commenting on the consultation, Finance Secretary Shona Robson said, quote, "The tourism sector is a crucially important part of the Scottish economy, and cruise visits are increasing. The consultation will help to inform the Scottish Government's decision over whether or not to bring forward legislation, and it is really important that we hear from a wide variety of voices on this matter." And now moving on to, I think, our last story of the night, unless there's one after this. Scottish child payment is currently supporting over 326,000 children. So new figures from Social Security Scotland have revealed that of the 31st of December 2024, the families of 236,000 children under the age of 16 were receiving support from the Scottish child payment. The Scottish Child Payment is a policy that was introduced by the Scottish Government back in 2021. It provides low-income families who are receiving some form of government benefits like universal credit, weekly payments of around £27 per child under 16. Over £1 billion in total have now been paid out by the scheme since it was introduced back in 2021. The Scottish Child Payment is unique to Scotland and provides financial support for families, helping with the cost of caring for a child. It's paid for by the Scottish Government, so it's effectively a devolved scheme. Commenting on the scheme, Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, quote, "Eradicating child poverty is the Scottish Government's top priority and a national mission. Our investment in Scottish Child Payment has seen over £1 billion worth of these payments issued by 31st of December 2024. That is money directly in the pockets of the families who need it most." Modelling published in February 2024 also estimates that the Scottish child payment could keep more than 6,000 children out of relative poverty this year. Scottish Child Payment is actively improving the lives of hundreds of thousands of children in Scotland, helping their families to assess essentials and experiences they might otherwise miss out on because they live in a family with low income. Scotland is the only part of the UK where child poverty is expected to decrease due to the actions of the Scottish Government, including the Scottish Child Payment and Best Start grants. Research suggests that Scotland's child poverty rate will fall from 23.7% to 21.8%, or projected research, by 2029, largely due to these efforts. Well, that's all I've got time for this evening for Scotland 7. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our viewers. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly donation, thanks very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, 16,000 short of our 36,000 target. So we had to borrow 12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive. But the pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we also need to clear our debts. A program that will always be free to view. However, if you can afford just £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.